Thank you all for watching and supporting my videos. Your encouragement keeps me inspired to create even more content. My next big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I can't do it without your help. If you enjoy what I create, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey. Now, let's dive into the stories. I was heading on a trip to visit my family for New Year's celebration. My train had a long route, and I calmly hoped that the night would pass without incident. I settled into my compartment, unpacked my things, and laid down on the bed, preparing to rest. The night journey was in full swing when I decided to take a short walk. The train was traveling across the country, and the compartment was silent, with only the sound of wheels turning on the tracks. I decided to visit the restroom, and when I returned, I heard a strange sound coming from another compartment. At first, I didn't pay much attention, thinking it was probably just noise caused by the train's movement. But after a few seconds, I realized the sound was unlike the usual mechanical noises. It was too realistic and loud, like someone quietly sobbing or whispering. Still, I didn't think much of it and lay back down, trying not to dwell on it. But in the middle of the night, amidst the darkness, I was woken by a faint, low cry. It seemed to be coming from the nearest compartment. At first, I didn't understand what it was, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. No, it wasn't just an ordinary cry, it sounded like a child crying, a sorrowful, desperate, and drawn-out wail. I thought it could just be another passenger, but the more I listened, the tenser my internal state became. I couldn't just lie there and listen to it, so I decided to leave my compartment. I was curious where it was coming from. I quietly opened the door and carefully walked down the corridor, trying not to make any noise so as not to draw attention to myself. If this was just a passenger, why were they crying so late at night? And why did the sounds not stop even as I got closer? Every step seemed heavy, as if the space around me was saturated with some inexplicable tension. I paused for a few seconds by one of the compartments from which the cry was coming. The sound didn't stop. I opened the door and peered inside. It was an empty compartment. There was nothing in it, just darkness and cold. I heard that same sound again, but this time it was coming from another part of the train. Now, it was much clearer, almost real, and I felt my heart begin to beat faster. Trembling, I returned to my compartment. It felt as though someone was watching me. Lying in the dark, I could no longer fall asleep. All these sounds. They wouldn't let me rest. I realized something was wrong with this train. Maybe it was just my anxiety from the long journey, but the sense of unusual tension never left me. The crying that echoed through the night wouldn't give me peace. Still, I thought that maybe it was just a coincidence, a mishap, or a strange series of events. But the more I listened, the more I felt that I wasn't alone on this train. Every sound seemed much closer and scarier than before. Maybe it was all just a trick of my imagination, but the fear wouldn't leave me. It wasn't until I returned to my compartment and lay down again that I heard another sound, a quiet but very real one. It seemed like footsteps. Someone was walking down the corridor. I froze, listening. The footsteps grew clearer, and I felt my heart begin to race. They were getting closer. The same quiet, almost soundless steps, but so real, it was as if each step echoed in my ears. I thought it might be another passenger, but something about all this felt off. Suddenly, without warning, the door to my compartment opened. Fear gripped me, and I froze, pressing my hands against the bed. The corridor was empty. Complete silence. I cautiously got out of bed and approached the door, trying to make no noise. It was dark in the corridor, but I noticed how the light at the other end of the train flickered on again. Footsteps. They were coming from that direction again. I felt the fear wash over me, like a cold wave. As I stepped out of the compartment, I glanced around, but there was no one. Only the darkness disturbed by distant flashes of light as the train passed through tunnels. Then I heard a whisper. It was the same sound I had encountered before. The whisper was almost inaudible, but I could make out one word: help. I stopped and, almost instinctively, started walking in that direction. The footsteps grew clearer, but when I reached the end of the corridor, I saw that the door to one of the compartments was open, and inside there was nothing. Only a shadow on the wall, moving as if someone was standing in the darkness. I turned back and heard the door to my compartment open again. This was too much. I couldn't take this continuous fear anymore. I rushed back into the compartment, closed the door, and felt my hands gripping the lock. But when I looked back at the bed, I saw that something was lying on it. I approached, and my heart dropped. It was a child's imprint on the blanket, like someone had lain on my bed but didn't remain there. Now, the fear was so real I felt it in every cell of my body. I quickly got up, grabbed my things, and decided I was leaving. Though I didn't understand what this cruel joke was, I was certain something was wrong here. I left the compartment and, looking around, walked down the corridor, not knowing where to go. The footsteps kept following me, and each new sound only heightened my fear. I slowly moved towards the next compartment, trying to stay as far away as possible from the place where I felt that evil had already enveloped it. When I reached the next door, it opened by itself, and I saw a shadow. It stood at the very end of the corridor, and for a moment, I thought it was a woman in black. But when I tried to get closer, she disappeared into the darkness, and once again, everything went silent. I stopped in my tracks, completely consumed by fear. Every muscle in my body was tense, and I could feel the cold sweat on my forehead. This was not an ordinary night, not an ordinary train. Something was wrong. I quickly turned around and began running back to my compartment, trying not to look back, because I felt something or someone was following me. The footsteps continued, getting closer and closer. I was almost at my door when something stopped me. It was another sound, a low, heavy one, like someone's breathing. And though I knew I had no time to think, my body wouldn't listen. I froze, unable to move forward. It wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was something I could feel inside, an overpowering presence. Finally, I ran into my compartment, slammed the door shut, and collapsed onto the bed. My gaze immediately fell on an old photograph on the shelf, a small white house in the woods with people in front of it. They were all smiling, like a typical family. But when I looked closer, I noticed something in the background, between the trees, several figures. These were shapes I hadn't noticed before. People who seemed to have no faces. Suddenly, everything started to move. The light flickered, and the train rattled, as if something had gotten stuck in the wheels. I stood up and went to the window. Outside, the night was dim, but in the fog, I saw something strange, the same dark silhouette, the face that had been watching me from the shadows. I froze, and suddenly realized, the train wasn't just heading to a destination. It was an endless train, a train that moved in an eternal loop, where every passenger became part of its nightmare. I looked around the compartment, and then I saw the same black footprints on the blanket, and this time, they led to the door. I hurried to lock the door again and sat on the bed. The train plunged back into darkness, and I felt that invisible fear wash over me. I closed my eyes, trying not to hear any sound. It could have been just my imagination, or the train might never actually reach its final stop. And when I finally opened my eyes, I wasn't sure if I had stayed in this world. It was an unusually quiet night, and the train ride to the city felt like any other journey, long and uneventful. I boarded the train just before midnight, after a hectic day at work, eager to finally make my way home. The ride was smooth, and the gentle rocking of the train soon lulled me into a peaceful doze as we passed through dark, sleepy towns. I sat by the window, trying to relax, but something about the train didn't feel quite right. The air was heavy, and there was an unsettling stillness inside the compartment. I shrugged it off, thinking I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me. The train was nearly empty, save for a few passengers scattered throughout the cars. At one stop, a woman entered the compartment and sat directly across from me. She looked out the window as if she was waiting for something, or someone. She was wearing a long coat, but her face was hidden behind dark glasses, even though the night was pitch black outside. Her presence made me feel uneasy, but I couldn't explain why. The train picked up speed, and the rhythmic clatter of the tracks seemed to blend with the quiet hum of the engine. The woman sat motionless, staring at the window. I tried not to stare at her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every few minutes, I would glance her way, and every time, she seemed more still, more detached, almost as if she wasn't really there. I decided to break the silence. "Excuse me," I said, my voice slightly shaky, "is the next stop far?" I hoped for a normal response, something to ease the tension in the air. She didn't immediately answer. Then, she slowly turned her head towards me, and when she did, I felt a chill run down my spine. Her eyes, though hidden behind the dark glasses, were unblinking, staring at me intensely, as if studying me. I could swear I saw the faintest movement of her lips forming a smile, but there was something hollow about it, like it didn't reach her eyes. "No," she finally whispered. "We're almost there." I looked at the clock above the door. We should have been far from the city, but something felt wrong. The train's speed had slowed down significantly, and the lights flickered for a moment. A strange hum filled the air, making my ears ring. It wasn't the sound of the train anymore, it was something deeper, a vibration that seemed to come from the very walls. Suddenly, the train jolted violently. I grabbed the armrests in panic, but before I could comprehend what had happened, the lights went out entirely, plunging the train into total darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to focus on the sounds around me. For a few moments, everything was silent. Then, I heard it. A low, distant voice, soft at first, almost imperceptible. It came from somewhere deep within the train. It wasn't a shout, but it was unmistakably a voice, and it seemed to grow louder as if it was approaching. I couldn't tell if it was the woman across from me speaking or someone else entirely. I stood up, my legs shaking, and moved toward the aisle, trying to make my way to the door, but before I could reach it, I felt a hand on my arm. I spun around to find the woman standing right behind me, her face inches from mine. Her glasses were gone, and in the dim light, I could finally see her eyes, empty, hollow eyes, black as coal. The smile that had once seemed faint now stretched across her face, unnaturally wide. "You shouldn't have gotten on this train," she whispered. I tried to pull away, but her grip tightened, and the train suddenly lurched again, throwing me to the floor. The lights flickered once more, but now they revealed something terrifying. In the reflection of the glass windows, I could see that the train had stopped, and outside, there was only a dense fog, stretching endlessly in every direction. "Where are we?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she pulled me toward the back of the train, toward a door that shouldn't have been there. Behind it, I saw only darkness. Suddenly, the train lurched again, but this time, it wasn't moving forward, it was sinking, slowly, as if it was vanishing into the fog. Panic seized me, and I struggled to break free from her grasp, but it was no use. As the train descended into the mist, I realized something horrifying: this train didn't go anywhere. It was lost, just like the passengers, trapped in an endless loop of time and space, a forgotten relic on tracks that had long stopped existing. And in that moment, I understood. The woman wasn't a passenger. She was part of the train, just as trapped as I now was. I tried to scream, but my voice seemed to disappear into the suffocating silence that now enveloped the train. The sensation of sinking deep into the fog was overwhelming, like the very air was thickening, closing in around us. Every breath felt harder to take, and my heart raced faster with every second. The woman, her hollow eyes still fixed on me, stepped toward the door at the end of the car. I had no choice but to follow. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the oppressive stillness, and with each step, I felt the train sinking deeper, like it was slipping away from reality itself. We reached the door. The moment she touched the handle, the air shifted again, and the familiar low hum filled the cabin. But it wasn't the hum of the train's engine. It was something darker, like the sound of 1,000 whispers, like the entire world was holding its breath. The door opened. Behind it was nothing but an endless stretch of blackness, darker than any night I had ever known. The fog had thickened so much that I couldn't even see my own hand in front of my face. I could hear nothing but the beating of my own heart and the oppressive, suffocating silence. And then, in the distance, I saw a light. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but it grew brighter, closer. It was small, flickering like a distant candle in a storm. I couldn't help but move toward it, as if something inside me was pulling me forward. As I walked, the air grew colder, and the whispers around me grew louder, though I still couldn't make out the words. They were just shapes in the dark, and the deeper I went, the more they surrounded me. I glanced over my shoulder to find the woman was still there, following me silently, her footsteps never faltering, as if she had all the time in the world. I reached the light, but when I saw what it illuminated, I froze in horror. It wasn't a beacon of safety, as I had hoped. It was a window to another train. It looked identical to the one I had just left, with the same flickering lights and empty seats, but the passengers inside. They weren't like any passengers I had ever seen. They were still, frozen in place, their eyes wide open but unseeing. They didn't blink, didn't move, and they seemed to stare directly at me. In the middle of the compartment stood a man. He was standing perfectly still, his face expressionless, his eyes locked on mine. He wore a black coat, and his hands were folded neatly in front of him. There was something deeply wrong about him, something I couldn't place, something that made my skin crawl. "Come closer," a voice whispered behind me. I spun around to find the woman standing in the doorway. She had removed her coat, revealing a plain white dress that seemed to shimmer in the darkness. Her smile had returned, but this time, it was wider, stretching almost impossibly across her face. Her lips parted as if to say something, but the words didn't come out as sound. Instead, they seemed to be inside my head, pressing against my skull, demanding to be heard. "Come closer," she repeated, her voice now clear and loud, as if coming from all directions. The man in the other train didn't move, but his eyes. They followed me. They were no longer lifeless but full of intent. It was as if he knew something I didn't, something that made him reach out to me, even from within that other train. I felt an overwhelming urge to answer his silent call, to step into that other world, that other train, and join the passengers who seemed to be waiting. But then I heard something else, something different. A voice, my voice, calling to me from somewhere deep inside. It wasn't the woman's, nor the man's. It was my own voice, faint but urgent, desperate. "Don't go in," it whispered. "Don't join them. They're trapped. Just like you." I took a step back from the light, away from the window, trying to listen to my own instincts, but the pull toward the other train was too strong. The woman moved closer, her shadow stretching longer as she advanced, and I felt like I was being drawn toward her, as if I had no power to resist. Then, just as I thought I would be lost to the darkness, the train jolted again, and everything went black. I woke up with a start, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The train was still, silent once more. The lights were on, flickering gently. I looked around, disoriented, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Everything was back to normal. The compartment was empty, and the woman. She was gone. But as I sat there, trying to steady my breath, I realized something horrifying. There was a small piece of paper on the seat next to me. I hadn't seen it before, and yet, it was there. I unfolded it with trembling hands, and my heart sank as I read the words written on it. "You're not getting off this train." I looked out the window again. The fog was gone, and the world outside was bright and clear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the train had never truly stopped moving, and that I was no longer sure if I could ever escape. I sat there frozen, staring at the note, the words echoing in my mind. "You're not getting off this train." The air felt thick again, heavier than before, as if the very weight of those words had made it harder to breathe. I looked around, expecting something, anything, to tell me I was still in control. But everything was just as it had been, ordinary in its chaos. The train was still moving, the soft hum of the wheels on the tracks, the flickering of the lights above. I shoved the note into my pocket, unable to shake the unease growing inside me. It was impossible to ignore. I tried to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself it was just a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Something was different. The door to the next compartment slid open with a quiet creak. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard anyone approach. No footsteps, no warning. I didn't even have time to look before a shadow filled the doorway. My breath caught in my throat, and my body went rigid, instinct screaming for me to run. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, staring at the figure standing there. It was the man from the other train, the one who had watched me from behind the glass. His face was still unreadable, expressionless, but there was something about him now. A heaviness in his gaze, a knowing that made every part of me want to turn away. But I couldn't. He stepped forward, his footsteps silent but deliberate. I could feel the weight of his presence, as if the train itself had become smaller with him in it. His eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, I thought I could see something beyond the cold emptiness, a flicker of something real. A flicker of fear. "I was hoping you would come," he said, his voice low and almost comforting, yet filled with a chilling undertone. "But you never do. They never do." "What do you mean?" I managed to choke out, my voice shaking. "Where are we going? What is this place?" His lips barely moved as he spoke. "You're already here, and you'll never leave. None of us ever do." I felt the weight of his words, the truth of them pressing against me. The walls of the train seemed to close in. There was no exit, no way out. The moment I had stepped onto this train, I had become a part of it, a part of this endless journey. I looked back at the window, where the world outside had once been clear. Now, it was just an opaque blur. The tracks stretched on endlessly, leading nowhere. The horizon had disappeared, and all I saw was a dark void. The man's expression softened, just for a moment, like a flicker of humanity before it was gone again, replaced by the cold, indifferent gaze of someone who had already given up on trying to escape. You were always meant to be here. Like the rest of us. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. My body felt heavier, like the weight of his words had seeped into my bones. And then, in a heartbeat, the realization hit me: there was no train anymore. There was no journey. There was only the never-ending loop. The lights above flickered again, but this time they didn't return to normal. The flickering grew faster, more erratic, as if something inside the train was beginning to break down. And then everything went dark. The world outside was a blur of shadows. The train had become a ghost of its former self, its tracks no longer leading anywhere. And as the darkness swallowed me whole, I finally understood what the man had meant. I wasn't getting off. Not now. Not ever. The train would keep moving, endlessly, in circles, and so would I. Forever.